I'd like to call to order this work study of the Cave Creek Unified School District. Today is Monday, February 3rd, and it is 3 p.m. Would everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, for our roll call, all members of the cabinet are present. Dr. Pletnick, Dr. Hendrickson, Dr. Jensen, and Mr. Dolezal. Members of the board physically present are Jackie Ulmer, Dan Moore, and myself. Unfortunately, due to work commitments, members Walker and Fortney are not able to attend. And I want to thank everyone who is in attendance. Obviously, planning a meeting on short notice is challenging, but it is vitally important for all stakeholders to attend. Unfortunately, it has been virtually impossible to find a date that accommodates everyone's schedule. Because of the work study session on January 28th ended prior to the board having an opportunity to pose all their questions, the board expressed an interest in having another work study session prior to the February 11th board meeting. Scheduling the meeting today was our only option to have a quorum present. As I said, we have two members of the board who are not present. Any questions that they have submitted will be read, and it will be identified that these are questions that board member has asked. Additionally, this work session is being recorded, so all those board members not in attendance are afforded ample time to view the recording and prepare any additional questions which can be posed at the February 11th meeting. Okay. And with that said, I just want to say that all of the work that's gone into this so far is very much appreciated. The board has been presented with a lot of information, and I believe, when I say this, I speak for everyone. While there's been a lot of information that's been presented regarding the economic future of Cave Creek, there's still a lot of questions that we need to have answered because we are the oversight board and we have to make a vote on what's going to be recommended. We need to be sure that we're comfortable with understanding how the district achieved its recommendations. And so as we proceed, what I would like to do is we're going to go around and each one of us will ask a question, so not one person is going to monopolize all the time, so we all get equal billing, so to speak. So with that said, first question I'm going to ask, and it's probably one of the most important questions, the recommendations that have been presented, how's that impacting academics?
Currently, at this time, I'd actually believe that it is not. I believe our teachers at both Lone Mountain and Desert Sun, the schools impacted, are doing a great job keeping education and their students at the forefront of all their decisions. So I know in talking with both principals that education is continuing, talking to parents, their students are still learning, talking with some students at those schools. They are still, classes proceeding, lessons are proceeding. I don't have specific benchmark data off the top, but Dr. Jensen, I don't know if you do as well, but again, our main business and our main focus is educating kids and helping them grow socially, emotionally, academically, and all those areas. So,
yes, and just to add, correct. Right now, our benchmarks are typical of what we would typically see. However, I guess what I will say is I think what's on the table is an effort to preserve academics. If we do not go forward with closing two schools, I don't think we'll recognize Cave Creek next year as the same school district as what we currently see. Academics will absolutely be impacted. We will have larger class sizes. We will have to look at cutting programs at the high school. We'll have to make what I would call thresholds at the high school for if we don't have a certain number of students, those courses would be removed, which would negatively impact fine arts, which I would say are part of academics, theater, IB, AP. We would have our 4 cores, and there would not be a whole lot of options for students to choose within those 4 cores. So what we're trying to do is preserve academics and then be able to move forward with improving academics after that. We've got a lot of great plans for dual enrollment, as we've discussed, for advancing options for our students, for increasing potentially down the road CTE programs. But without the funding, we won't be able to hire the teachers to do that. We will be just the 4 cores. At the elementary, specials would be reduced as well.
Well, and I would say there's even there'll be some consideration, since, you know, the main 3 functions of the board are budget, policy, and then myself as superintendent. There'll be some weighing and measuring of how much carry forward do we eat into, how much DAA do we bring over. So all of those are options in terms of us trying to get aligned and get in a fiscally responsible and solvent position as a district. So those challenges come later. Again, I don't know if you were talking about right now or into the future.
Mostly in the future.
Okay.
But you answered that.
Perfect.
So thank you.
Yeah, and I think I hit most of them, but I'm trying to think if there's others. I think those are the main things.
When you say oversized classrooms next year, can you say more about that in light of if we don't close schools?
Yes. So if we close schools, we are consolidating classrooms enough to save the equivalent of, I'm going to say 18 teachers. It's 12 K5 or K6 and 6 specials teachers. If we don't close schools, we still need to save the equivalent of 18 teachers. And so those students would just be split amongst a smaller number of teachers. We're not going to go up to rooms of like 45, but what we would do is right now, if we have 45 students who sign up for 2nd grade, let's say, we give them 2 teachers, a class of 22 and a class of 23. Next year, what it would look like is they would get 1 2nd grade teacher, and then they'd have a 2-3 combo class. And so we would be having no less than 29 to 30 kids in every single classroom across the district. Right now, we're very generous with flexing that, and we would have to follow the board policy to the letter in terms of those targets and those ranges.
Okay, so we're closing 2 schools cuts 18 teachers, but we're also talking about hiring teachers for other roles. How does that?
I don't think we're going to.
More specific?
Yeah.
Well, I was just listening, and so maybe I misunderstood what your answer was to Janet's question, which was you were talking about expanding programs and staffing.
That's what we would like to do down the road in the future. So first of all, we have to get even. So using Superintendent Dolezal's analogy, we got to flip the boat first. And once we flip the boat, we could start decking it out with some better things on the boat. So first of all, we need to get financially solvent, and that's cutting $2.5 million roughly. And then once we get to there, then we would be able to start talking about, okay, now could we run an override or a bond, or could we find other revenue streams, whatever they may be, whether they're voter approved initiatives or something else, to then enhance some of our other programs. So right now we have dual enrollment, we have IB, we have AP, we have fine arts. I don't want those to go away. If we don't close the schools, the reason I say they will go away, not only because we will have to say to the high school, I'm sorry, there's only 9 kids who signed up, and I know in the past we let you guys double up and we had you teach AP Physics and IB Physics at the same time, and we let him, have 2 preps within one class period, we would have to start to say, we can't do that because now we need you to teach sophomore physics because we have to max out those classes in order to make our class sizes. So on one hand, it would pull those programs, but then on the other hand, we'd be choking out our fine arts programs because we'd be sharing specials teachers across the elementary schools. We did that a couple years ago. It was not effective. We are still seeing the effects of that in the middle and the 8th and 9th grade right now, because students weren't signing up for the course. If they don't fall in love with it somewhere along the way, then they aren't signing up for the courses in middle and high school.
And I just want to echo how important it is to me to really offer comprehensive schools at all levels. And comprehensive schools means that we are focusing on academic growth, we're focusing on physical growth, we're focusing on artistic growth and mental health of all of our students. And that's having those well-rounded courses. Again, through my letters out to the community and talking with you all, closing schools is nothing we'd ever want to do, but in order to have the well-rounded programming to promote all of those growth and a sustainable approach that empowers students and teachers to thrive, we believe the best scenario is really having, getting aligned, having our costs match what our income is, what our budget is from the state, and once aligning those, as Dr. Jensen mentioned, we get those in line. We're stopping moving DAA over just to cover our M&O expenses. Now we have a viable DAA where we can start doing, innovative new curriculums for different classes. We can start purchasing those things that we have not been able to do in the past because we've moved it all over into M&O at that point in time. Again, ultimately, it'll come down to a board decision in terms of what we want to cut, how much we want to cut, how much of carry forward do we want to use, how much of DAA do we want to slide over. That's part of those budgetary considerations that we'll continue to do with you guys in consultation with you.
Okay.
So we're talking about, I guess we're on this one. Let's stay on this one. As a non-educator, what are the must-haves from an administration role, from a district office role that keeps us state compliant? Like, if we're really, no matter which way we go, I'm looking at all of the contingency plans. So let's say you get your ask and you close 2 schools. Then we have fallout far past the projected amount. Guess what's coming next? The conversation that comes with what you guys are stating if we don't close 2 schools. So if we don't, I guess my question is, what are the must-haves to stay compliant with the state of Arizona when it comes to administration roles?
Must-haves would be we have to meet the Board of Regents and what they say are the required coursework for a student
Not just
to
coursework,
graduate.
I'm more talking head count, because everything's going to come down to head count. That's just kind of the essence. So does each school have to have a principal, or can it have a functioning role and a district office role can act as a principal? Like, I'm just trying to understand the landscape of the business side of things, of what you can and cannot do. That, obviously there's state obligations, so it's not like a business. I know we keep talking business, but
there's some things that are and some things that aren't.
this is not a
right?
clean-cut business by
right.
any stretch of the imagination.
Thank you for realizing that, because it's true. There are some things we can talk about business and some things that are different when
Correct.
you're dealing with kids and families and communities and that. So for the most part, it is local control. That's what is preached down from the feds and then into the states and then down here. So in terms of what that looks like, I'm not aware of any state mandate that says every building has to have a principal. Things like that. I know some smaller school districts have done different things when there are smaller schools. I've heard of that. I don't know any personally. But in terms of requirements, the state board just really sets what are the requirements in terms of high school. There is no minimum number of students that make up a school. It's within what that board, what you can afford and what you can do in terms of the budget. There are some things coming out right now in terms of leadership and board responsibilities with budgets and all of that, and perhaps putting some more skin in the game. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but
Well, it's coming.
it feels like it, right?
Yeah.
in terms of that, and ultimately, as the district oversight, and then as the board as the oversight of the oversight, again, I want to get to a place where we're living within our means, and focused on kids, and they're moving forward, all of those developmental areas. Once we get that financially stable and solvent district, then we look at having those, because we're not moving that money. We can do those other things. We can have our own repairs without having to go out to the community and those types of things. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I'm not aware of any, to go specifically to that, any specific that says you have to have at least 30 students to have a school.
Right. There's no, so what you're saying is there's no real, the bottom line is, can you perform as a functioning district, whatever those rules may be? So you
Right,
can reimagine how things look if you wanted
within,
to.
Here's your budget dollars.
Right.
Within there,
Well, yeah, I understand. Obviously, there's certifications from that aspect, but I mean, if you had a head count that has certification, you could place that head count wherever you see. Just trying to understand the lay of the law here.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if you,
I know these mics are fun.
I mean, certification would be the one thing to hold an administrative position, and then the question becomes, looking at that, if somebody does have a like an admin certification, if you put them in a TOA position, what are you getting versus somebody who's going to fill a position?
which is a teacher on assignment, so
Yeah.
they're doing something.
Yeah, so I mean, then it becomes, if you want to take it to what kind of employee are you going to attract based upon that position too? I mean,
Yeah.
but can you reimagine something again?
Less is more strategy. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, if you're coming into something, and obviously the goal and the objective is right side the ship without disrupting, which I won't take. I'll come back on my second question on that one. But the point being is, anytime you're running into a situation like this, you generally look at your complete hand that you have and you go, how can I do things that make the most possible sense without jeopardizing the things that mean the most? Meaning, if we're putting the student at the forefront of everything, then first and foremost, that key touch to the student is the teacher. So the teacher now is becoming the number one position in what we do, right? So how can we do more with less? Can we get creative and find solvent ways to pay the teachers more and yet stay within our means because we've reimagined how we look at things? And again, I don't know all the ins and outs. I'm just kind of trying to understand more of, yes, we're talking about closing schools, but unfortunately for this conversation, it's far beyond that, because it's not just that. There's consequences in every decisioning of all of these things on the table, which is where I'm struggling the most, is because there hasn't been presented a clear line of sight to this is where we're going. That make sense? Okay. I'll come back for the follow-up on that one. But.
Well, and I guess the clear line for me is, again, that fiscally responsible and solvent district where we are financially stable, able to do those things. And with that there, then we have our powerful learning schools and centers that are all based around students.
Yes, but I would just encourage this cabinet to not get so hyper-focused on that, because that's where you make a bad decision. I played this game, the bad decision comes, I'm so panicked in the decision of right-siding financially, I've lost my way in where we're actually going, because money's the byproduct of doing the right thing. And if we get hyper-focused on doing the right thing, we will solve our problems. Not just in the essence of this one, like, I mean, again, it's a magnitude of decisions right now because of where we're at, and again, you guys didn't create it. You just get the bag of trying to figure your way out of it. And I get that. I have an immense amount of empathy. At the same point in time, I have the responsibility, right? So we are in this together, contrary to how we all might feel. But I think we 100% are in this, and I think that we've got to be diligent and not just getting hung up on this one matter of what we're trying to accomplish right now. It's bigger than that.
I hear you. And I'll also say that it's possible that this is a means to get to that same ends as well. And I share your feeling in terms of, if all of us had a crystal ball that knew exactly what was going to be perfect and all of that, we'd be done, and there wouldn't be these conversations and the need to continue to communicate and work together. But that's not the case. So that's why we're here, is to work through all those things.
I think one of the differences too is we can't ever live beyond our means. So the difference between, I guess, maybe a business world and a educational world is that you can't take the calculated risk to create this thing, this ideal comprehensive school, if we don't have the money. Like, we have to have the money first, and then we can do it. We don't get to borrow against anything, I guess. That's the one thing that's a little bit hard with that, is that there is, like, we have to have the money before we can move forward, unless somebody wants to be like
A benefactor?
a donor.
That's a different topic for a different day.
So,
But it's a fair, I mean, it's a fair statement, and I would just say, no, depending on the business mechanism, many have to live within their means. And as one that has played in this game, I've had to play within budget a lot of times, but it didn't, and even being in a situation, whether it be a COVID or any type of alarming thing that comes to the business that has an immense impact on the business, and the goal was we never lost sight on, we knew who we were, we knew the vision we were driving towards, and we doubled down on staying in line, staying in budget, but pushing harder to become a better product, whatever that might be. So that's just kind of...
Well, and I guess along those lines, I will throw out who we are is we have a tradition of excellence and a reputation that is a hallmark of CCUSD, this community, and that's come on the backs of our kids, on the backs of our teachers who are incredibly hardworking and dedicated. So again, not losing sight, who have we become and where are we going? Again, that has to do with our 3 E's, and we're aiming our kids to be successful once they leave Cactus Shadows in whatever pathway they're choosing. Again, that is all there. We are the fans of our kids, of our parents, of all of that. That is all there. None of that has to change. The way, and this is going to come back to the way we're doing business right now needs to change. And I'll leave it at that rather than, but just the business.
Okay.
You got a couple of questions, I think, from Member Fortney.
Yeah, Member Fortney had emailed in a couple questions. So the first one being, if we use the closed schools for anything student-related, as in SPED, pre-K, etc., the SFD percentages still apply, correct? So the answer to that is correct. As long as we have our students in there, they're still covered by SFD. He put, but if the buildings are leased, then what? Would we still be responsible for 63% of the Lone Mountain School repairs? And so I believe that's correct, right? Nope. If we're leasing it out.
Correct.
No, if we lease it out, it becomes a whole different ballgame, because then we have to go to SFD and state that we are leasing. So at that point, I'll bring up, for example, I have the Bella Vista contract that for years, Bella Vista rented dams. Again, that predates me, so you may have to help me on this. But in that particular contract, in the lease, Bella Vista was responsible for basically the upkeep, and they were also responsible for the costs of maintenance and repairs for the buildings that they used in 5.2 of their lease. So that is one thing we can work, just like Bella Vista, we work that into their lease.
And so that's important to know too. Anything that we would do in terms of a lease or a usage would come to the board for approval in terms of that lease agreement and anything that goes in the schools, should that be what's decided to do with those.
Okay, this is a question from Member Walker regarding potential school closure and boundary changes. With the boundary changes, Desert Willow is no longer equitable in comparison to the student body size of Horseshoe Trails and Black Mountain. How does this organization work with us trying to keep classroom size equal amongst elementary schools? And how do we then grow the Spanish immersion program when perception will be that it is next on the chopping block, similar to what we saw happen at Desert Sun?
Well, I'll start with that one, and Dr. Jensen, I don't know if you would, but I mean, the change in the boundary recommendation was due to listening to feedback from our community. And then in her question, in terms of keeping classroom sizes equal amongst elementary, Desert Sun, or Desert Willow, sorry, would be staffed with the same ratio as Black Mountain and Horseshoe Trails. So while Black Mountain and Horseshoe Trails might have 3 or 4 classrooms at a grade level, at 25, 26, whatever they are, if that's a first grade classroom, for instance, Desert Willow would be staffed at the same 25, so there might only be 2 at Desert Willow, but the ratio of teacher to students would remain the same there.
Yes, that's correct. And in terms of marketing, one of the things we're considering is Desert Willow is one of the only international Spanish academies. It used to be the only, and now there is one other international Spanish academy in the state of Arizona. And so we want to play that up and really try to market it as an international Spanish academy, not just as an elementary school. Having only Spanish for the most, like, we would still have a 4th and 5th grade group that would be English as well, but having only Spanish would allow for some maybe creativity in terms of marketing and doing some additional fun programming, or I shouldn't say fun, but enriching programming. So, and in terms of, yeah, that's the challenge is always, I don't ever want to say somebody's on the chopping block, but the way we're currently funded, nobody's fault here, this is down at the state level, we would have to look at efficiencies down the road. And as we've discussed many times, there's no reason that program could not eventually, if we ever needed to do something, that doesn't mean the program needs to disappear. The program could be absorbed by another larger campus, and it would go back to the school within a school model. But I think...
And that's true of,
yeah.
of all of our schools left. We'll be constantly looking at numbers, where the population is, where those things are, and working within the established teacher to student ratios, whether that's, high school, middle school, or elementary school. As a high school declines from 1,800 students to 15 to 14, there's some natural decline. You don't need as many teachers at that point in time. So some of that, as you're lowering your budget capacity because you don't have as many students, some of that is naturally taken care of because then you're therefore not needing as many teachers as well.
Okay. Since you touched on efficiencies, we are looking at the potential of closing 2 schools, consolidating 6th grade to the middle school. So we've asked a lot of our parents, our families, our students, change your school, change your location. We've asked, we're asking a lot. It's a big ask. So in the vein of efficiencies, you've said that we have to reduce the budget equivalent to 18 teachers. Okay. So what's the administration done? What in the district office has been reduced? I mean, somebody came to a board meeting with a graphic and a org chart, and here's all the director and administrator positions, and over here's, I think it was 40 support positions. If we're reducing our population and our dollars are going down, conventional wisdom would say, maybe we don't need 40 support positions.
Well, I will start with saying I'm still struggling to find what 40 support positions there are at district office, because I've gone through the charts, I've gone through, if you take those out, so.
Can we just post it? I mean, part of ending all of the noise that you guys are combating is just put it on the table. I mean, I don't know what other way to put it. Excuse my bluntness.
No, I agree with you. So, and that's one thing I was looking at our directory today, and I was like, okay, I heard that argument. Let's look at the directory and let's see what these positions are. And it kind of goes back to your question of, let's reimagine what are required, the administration piece. So that's what kind of brought me to that rather than the school piece.
Yep.
And if you look at it, besides the 4 cabinet members and you look at the director positions, I'm not going to include food and nutrition again because that's a separate funding. The food and nutrition and then ECS as well. They are that side of the house that's in business. So they have the cash side, so they get funded based upon what money they bring in. So that ECS side. So if we look at our other departments, there are 4 certified directors. So if you look at the 4 certified directors, and Frank, you can, with the HR side, I'm just going to list them off, and Patty, what kind of responsibilities. But the certified directors would be our ESS, so our special education director. That is definitely a very needed position
And we've had
within the district.
conversations about the amount of money that gets spent on special education overall.
Yeah. Our career and technical education, which also helps us bring in the funds from our CTE programs. Our assessment coordinator, who's in charge of all the state required testing. Again, Patty, and you can speak to this, but if that position was removed, then that would fall upon school administration to perform those tasks. And I'm sure, again, Patty, you can fill in the rest of that. Student services, and that student services position is in charge of the safety and security of the school. The state's doing currently the safety audit, big concern of that, but it also handles that discipline, the long-term suspensions, the international students. There's quite a few pieces that go along.
Our SRO grants.
SRO grants as well. Then you look at it, and there's 4 classified directors, so they're not certified. The first one is our technology director, who's in charge of all district technology. Our transportation director, just in charge of just what you think on that one. Facilities, Mr. Santina, who's in charge of all of our facilities. And then finance director. And that position is in charge of essentially working through not only grants, which normally would be a separate position in most districts, but also working with the county and making sure our bank accounts with the county are reconciled and that our warrants are paid and so forth. So those would be the 8 director positions. If you look at those are all important positions in order to keep the district afloat and running. Then if you look at that, there's 24 classified employees that would work within that district office range. Now, if you look at it, there's 6 administrative assistants. There's 3 in the HR department. There's 5 in the finance department. Then we have one in the special ed department. We have 5 involved in the technology department that aren't directly at schools. And then there's 3 in the transportation, which would include somebody in charge of, that would be our warehouse manager, our fleet supervisor, who essentially is head mechanic in that department, and also a transportation coordinator in that. So that would take this little chart, and again, separating out like the school-specific, like techs, and or school-specific positions, like coaches.
Obviously, every position is important. Otherwise, why is the job there in the first place? However, we're not in a perfect world right now. Mm-hmm. So are there jobs that can be consolidated and jobs descriptions combined to better maximize utilization of talent? Everybody's got to give something. Yeah. So.
And I think, and again, this is where I'll lean on everyone else here, is that over the past few years, there has been a shrinking of positions at the district office. So that has been number one, because it doesn't directly impact students. And again, I'll let Mr. Dolezal speak to kind of what the thought process has been over the previous years on that.
Well, again, let's cut and let's keep it away from the kids as much as possible. That's what we've been doing, kicking the can down, putting Band-Aids. Everything has been, let's keep it away from kids as best we can. And I would argue we've done a good job with that. To this point now, you look at, I understand what you're saying about can we cut, can we? The answer is yes. Where does that responsibility fall? I think if you asked whether it's principals, assistant principals, they don't have time to do that either. There's a story out there that administration gets paid, better in all these things. I want to make it clear, for some of those things, our principals work 18 to 24 more days than other principals in other districts, because there's that much work that needs to be done, because there's not the district level support to do all these other things that we would like to be doing to support them. Same thing with our directors, work more days than other directors in other different school districts because there's not the number of people to do that. With all of that, we are still below our peers in how much money we are spending in administration in terms of dollars. So again, I think that's been there and done. We've done a good job with that. We will continue to always look for, is there efficiencies? Can we do things, again, without necessarily putting the burden? And where that didn't go is, I talked about the burden falling down to principals and administrators at a district, also keeping that away from teachers to have to do that, because then again, we're taking away time from them being with their kids if they have to do other administrative stuff on testing, benchmarking, on safety. Any of those other jobs, to add those is not something we want to do. And give them more responsibility. It's really an attempt to take off of that responsibility and let them do.
Yeah. And also I'd like to state this year alone, and this is one thing just to kind of keep our M&O in check, that our ESS department consists of our director and one support person. That's it. We've cut, 3 positions from that department. We cut 1 in transportation and combined duties there. So that's something that constantly, at least I'm talking to my directors about, okay, how can we become more efficient in our job? So even this year, we've seen a consolidation of positions through that.
Perhaps providing some sort of a graphic. This is where we were. This is the number of positions. This is where we are today, so that it's easily understood, or a visual aid to help the community understand that this isn't falling just on the backs of students in certain schools. But just a follow-up to when you were saying ECS is basically self-funding, does that include benefits, or is the district paying for the benefits?
No, as part of their as part of all of our ECS, not as many ECS fall under benefits eligibility because they're just doing before and after, they're under 30 hours. But any of our employees that are, they're funded out of the ECS budget bucket, I guess if you can say, where that's where they're in payroll. That is where they're paid out.
Okay,
of,
well, I
will,
guess what I'm asking
including
is
benefits. Yep.
the revenue that's generated in ECS, is it
Covers
enough?
their expenses,
Does
yep.
it cover their expenses?
Yep, correct.
Okay,
And then some, and that's where that
Okay.
profit ability is through ECS.
okay, thank you.
By the way, this is my question number 1, because my last one was just a clarification on your question. All right, I'm yielding back my time. I guess I'd kind of like to start with a better understanding of the vision for the district, because we're here where we are today, and I don't like to focus a whole lot backwards, but I've been hearing for years, before I was even on the board, that we're probably going to be closing schools. I mean, that's been bannered around forever, so it's no mystery. And looking at the numbers and the data, I'm thinking to myself, this really wasn't presented till December, and it's been the most confusing process ever, because there's so many numbers, and I applaud all of the community members who have gotten so involved, and for good reason, because they have kids and they're vested in our community and all of that. So I'm asking about the vision for the district, because I'm thinking, I'm listening to a lot of stuff, and a lot of it is, we might be able to do this, and if we get this, then maybe this will happen. And that's great, but it's kind of like, Bill, what you said, we don't have a crystal ball. We're not in Vegas. It feels like we're in Vegas, betting on, black or red, and hoping that we win with a lot of these decisions. So looking back and thinking, we've kind of known this was coming. Where has this discussion been for the last few years? That's just a thought. We don't have to answer all of that. But now it feels like we're being wedged into essentially a 2-month process with holidays included in that to make a huge decision that's going to have a lot of impacts that we don't really understand. So do we have a comprehensive vision of multiple scenarios looking forward? Because it's like you said, we don't want to think about desert, another one on the chopping block, but the reality of it is it possibly is. The demographics aren't changing. What do we see changing? We've seen the demographic picture. Birth rates are lower. I don't think any of us have the ability to change that. I know I certainly don't. like, so what is going to happen if we can't really look ahead and say there's more kids coming in, we're going to replace this, that, or the other thing, then we have to seriously think that maybe another school is on the chopping block, and are we making a decision today for the best suited school that's going to serve everything and all of that? So that was a lot, sorry, but what is our vision, and have we really looked out into the future so that we can be more transparent and have this be a more team effort, I guess, I don't know.
Vice President Ulmer, well, I mean, I'm going to start with a little bit of the timeline because you're right. I think there's something out there that says this is rushed. I moved out here in '99, been in the district for that long, probably as soon as 2005, 6. There's been talk about closing schools. I mean, this goes back to a Q&A from 2011 on an override campaign. I know Dr. Burdick talked about it in years prior. Dr. Moreau discussed it with failed bonds, failed overrides. Action for Students had done something and talked about it in 22. Mrs. Rodriguez, our former CEO, had talked about it in 23. Our district website with Q&As have had it on there. IBN had done a presentation and talked about the possible need to be brave and consider things, including closing multiple schools. The facilities group did meet since May. And again, 5 meetings, 3.5 hours, plus hundreds of hours in between those meetings and stuff working. We had cut $1 million the prior year in terms of programming to address ESSER money ending, results-based funding money ending, other external revenue we don't see, some title funding being cut, things like we address counselors, we remove some aides, all of those things have been done. So this is a long overdue process. Now, in terms of vision, again, I will argue till the cows come home that CCUSD, the vision is to be a fiscally responsible and solvent district with powerful learning communities at every school and in centers that focus on meeting the needs of our students. And those students are their academic needs. And again, it goes back to that comprehensive school. I cannot sit here and support schools that don't honor academics. To me, that's a no-brainer to everybody in the room. But also, I can't support schools that don't support kids physically, whether that's PE, whether that's before in school, after programs. I do not support schools that don't support the arts. There are some kids that get up every day and their favorite thing, they can't wait for PE or lunch or whatever. There are some kids that the reason they get out of bed is to go to theater or to go to choir or to go to, and those aren't necessarily our programs that are sitting there at huge numbers right now, but those kids need it. And to be a comprehensive school, we need to honor those things. And then again, I can't support a school district that isn't there for the mental health and well-being of our students and our staff as well. So in terms of that vision, that's where we have to get to. We have to be the school district that is comprehensive in our offerings across the board for all of those things. It's not just enough to be able to academically move our students. Moving them academically is one piece. That to me is not a full K-12 experience. Academically does not get them into enlist, enroll, or go into employment right away. Those other pieces are the things that actually make the students want to come. So to that vision, getting that fiscally responsible and solvent district then allows us to sit there when we get it right and have, okay, our DAA is not moving. We can go out and address, let's look at these innovative curriculums that are out there that are different, that are not, we don't have the funds because all of that gets swept over. So we get this right, we become that fiscally responsible, working within those means, we're doing what we need to do. We can go out and do that then. It's interesting because now I don't know if catch-22 is the right word, but I hear people say, okay, you're telling us you're cutting, but what are you giving us? Okay? Well, we've got to get into that point where we are level, because again, you've heard it, we've been spending $32 million when we shouldn't have been. Okay? We don't have the carry forward that's going to sit there and sustain it. There will be decisions in terms of, are we closing none? Are we closing one? Are we closing two? That is ultimately, what is left under there. Those decisions come with Okay, well, what are the ramifications of those things? And how does that impact the vision of a district that wants to be a school district that meets the needs of all those students in all those different areas if we don't do that? Are we going to eat our carry forward even faster? We've run down scenarios that kind of get us through 28. Well, is the decision you want to make that you're going to cut that in half and we're going to use, that money sooner so we can still do all those things? Because again, having schools without a fully comprehensive program, there are risks to that as well. If you don't have those, why stay? And to me, that's nothing. Again, the decision to close schools is a hard one and a difficult one. The decision to have schools that don't have all those programs is just as hard and just as difficult.
Okay.
Let's keep going on that one. So I think it's important to say, first and foremost, transparency-wise, I have been given all transparency. I appreciate being allowed to go to these campuses, look for myself. I have been on everything except for horseshoe trails until Friday. I've looked at the classrooms. I've looked at the closets, the jokes that are made. I've spent time. And what I would say is, there is this point. There's a couple missing components. Number one, if you don't make us believe, we're just going to leave, right? So I think that's the point, and you're going there right now, which we haven't heard, is that passion. Passion starts to get you to understand where we're going and where we need to go. So we need more of that. Part two of the equation is have you talked to the consumer? You guys are coming from the perspective as educators of this is what we need, this is where we're going, but have we talked to the consumers? What is it they're looking for? Sometimes we get caught up in acronyms, right? STEAM, STEM, trust me, I'm still learning. But then I go on campuses and I go out over to Mr. Owsley at Black Mountain, and I spend some time with him. He knows how to sell it. And he's built a program, and he's got leadership, he's got these things. Are we digging in? Because I think we're looking too far out here and trying to throw spaghetti against the wall and be everything to everybody, when in reality, we really can't. We need to be who we are and be really good at it. And maybe that means we got to get honest with what we can and cannot do. And I don't know what the answer is. I charge you with that. But the vision is, this is who we are. And yes, those principles kind of make up a statement, but it doesn't define that moving target of who we really are and where we're really going. There are things that we have in this district that are like no other. And I don't know if you've gone out and really sat with the consumer and said, what are those things? We'll hear things like small town feel. I'm out there. I'm asking. Small town feel. Small classrooms. Start listening. We can build a product based on that. We don't have to chase what everybody thinks. There's other products that were built that don't have certified teachers, but yet they have high enrollment. Why is that? What did they do differently? I'm just saying this is a time to go, yes, this sucks. And yes, we got to make some tough decisions. But there's light in the darkness, and I'm trying to grasp, are you seeing it? Are you listening? We make comments again, same voices. I'm just going to dismiss that. There's no dismissing anything right now. Right? We've got to listen, and I charge this cabinet, are you really listening? Yes, Lone Mountain said we don't want to be separated. Okay, you heard part of it, but did you ask? What do you mean? Where do you want to go? What does it look like? What product are you looking for? What are those things that make it? And if we're not taking a hard look at Lone Mountain and saying, hey, here's a campus that's turned over leadership how many times over the last 7 years?
5, 4.
Okay.
Well, there was a principal that retired.
No, but just play along here. So turned over leadership. But yet the campus still stands, right? So there's something else running that campus. There's something there. I always say, don't pay attention to what the general optic is. Go deeper, dig deeper. There's something there. So what are we missing in the decisioning? And yes, I agree. Yes, it doesn't take a blind squirrel to realize that we're in a financial issue. I get that. I think we're, as a board, and I'll speak for myself and chime in, where the frustration lies is you didn't bring us along for the ride. You just told us what you wanted to do. And I think if we're together, we've got to be part of the conversation and part of the discussion further along instead of just getting it dumped in our lap and saying, here's your choices. Well, I don't like those choices. Because I don't know if I've had enough time to digest those are the right choices, because we don't know. But we have to have that ability to look and maneuver and work together in a collaboration to get to a better result. And I don't know if what we're staring down right now is the right one, because we're still guessing. There's a lot of what ifs in this equation. And there's got to be a little bit more certainty, I guess.
Well, and respectfully, I will say that I think there's always going to be what ifs.
I know. I just want to try and limit them a little bit.
Gotcha.
There's always going to be what ifs because
There's always a what ifs, but there's also what you. Let me
No,
clarify.
I get what you're saying.
But double
because-
down, stand for something. You can what if me to death, but you're going to, at one point in time, you're going to get pulled to the table of going, no, I hear you.
It's-
This
no,
is where I'm
I
going.
hear what
You know
you're
what I mean?
saying because the coined mantra for this district is now together. So, I think what you're asking is just exactly what does together mean? Is together the administration? Is together include the community as a whole? Because together, I think for this board means all of us, not just the people at this table, but the people there and the people in the community at large, because what we end up doing is going to impact them, whether they have kids in school or not.
Well, let's talk about the opportunities of together for a little bit, because coming together, I would respectfully argue we have 5 tremendous communities in our 5 elementary schools. All positives, all have great things going on, all have challenges as well. So when you talk about together, I can reimagine the possibility where we actually come together and we're at 3 schools at that point in time, and those communities are the better for it. That's what coming together is instead of fracturing and saying, no, me, I got to keep me over here and keep me safe, keep me all of that. Together means, okay, I understand there are some tough decisions that need to be made, and for the community overall, I can take our strengths from here, combine them with those strengths over there, and oh my God, what an amazing school and what an amazing school district that becomes in terms of coming more together. So it swings multiple ways in terms of that, and together is, how do we take these schools, how do we take the positives that are at every single school and then sprinkle them over? How do we take, again, I know you've talked about acronyms in that and STEAM, that is a program we've talked about. That is something that could be stretched. STEAM done well is not an individual program that you pull out to or anything like that. STEAM done well is an integrated approach where science, technology, mathematics, engineering, arts, all are incorporated into everything we do. That's a program that can be replicated at our elementary campuses. That is something, again, together, that can be there. Another thing in terms of together is we've talked a little bit about Portrait of a Graduate, and we're bringing that to the board later this year. But you talk about what's important, where we did talk to all of the stakeholder groups. The things that are important in a Portrait of a Graduate is things like grit. Don't like it, would not like to necessarily force down changes like that onto our kids, onto our families and all that. But what an opportunity to actually live the mantra of life is 90% what you make of what's given to you and 10% what happens to you. This is an opportunity to grow, to come together, to expand, to leave our comfort zones and create, again, schools that are that much better. That's what together is when you're talking about how do we do something, and it's not me over here, you over there. It's this together. I don't know what you...
No, I agree completely. And the other thing I was going, just to add, I understand, Dan, why you feel like it comes on late. And part of that's the nature of the board. Because the other side of it is if we would have started announcing in May when the focus group was starting, hey, we're looking at these 4 schools right now, they're gone.
It already happened. That did happen, though. That's my problem with is in the small community, that did happen. It happened as early as April that decisioning and rumors started. So when a rumor starts, and here's, I love having these working sessions because we can just be candid, is when I'm hearing it from where I shouldn't be hearing it, I fundamentally sometimes say that's a problem. Whether you're in business or whatever you are in life is, I'll always err on the side of transparency because you're not going to catch me. I'm just going to tell you what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and how I'm doing it. If you don't like it, then let's have a debate about it. Let's challenge about it. But the reality to it is if we just got done saying in one point, the district has for years failed financially and we're finally going to do something about it, then there's no secret. We should have just had it out early. But part of the deal is why do we have to be like everybody else? Why can't we be a working environment to where the board is brought along sooner so we can be a partner in the decisioning, so we can get to the right decision, so we can ask our questions, so by the time it really does hit the dais, we're like, a couple quick questions, boom, let's move on, because we've been transparent with the community, with ourselves, we've got the buy-in, we're moving together, and again, I get some of the reason why not, because it's painful, because again, you create fear. Well, we've already created fear. People are already leaving the district. The numbers don't lie. We might as well just put our cards on the table and run and come out and say things like that. That's what I've been waiting for. What you just said. The fire and the passion. If you led with that, these conversations would have taken a different turn. We led with doom and gloom, and we haven't gotten out of it, and everybody's going, oh my God, we might as well just run. Fire. But when you put it to the way you just got done explaining the district, the vision, together, that starts to get things moving in the right direction. But I think we got to mitigate the rumor mill, because the rumor mill is starting to, unfortunately for me, be truth. So when I hear a rumor, I'm going, ooh, here's what's coming. Like, I don't know about other members, but I'm just saying.
Well, in that regard, I would say I would please ask you to share that with us. So when you hear that, that's, I would argue that's one of the board responsibilities, is to share those things, because I don't necessarily believe it has been shared. I mean, we've talked, but again, not knowing specifically
I'll be
what
more
you're talking
clear.
about now. Perfect.
Yeah, I will be more direct.
Perfect.
Sometimes hinting,
But again, like, we made it public, I think it was February or March last year, IBN said, we want 2 schools shut down and this other 4-day thing explored.
Yeah, the
And
counter.
so that, like, to me, that was public at that point. Then that committee has to have, or focus group had to have the opportunity to have those conversations without all of the noise. Because when all the noise happens, that's when we're distracted every which direction.
Where was that shared? In February?
At the board meeting.
Board meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's in board docs.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it is.
There was a mention, yes. Yes, there was.
They wanted it effective last August, just, that was the recommendation.
And I did catch heat for saying, no, we're going to slow
Yes.
down and wait, and we're going to actually investigate and take our time and make a better decision than just rushing into it.
Or does Jeff have more questions?
His other question had to do, and I lost it already, I apologize, had to do, what is the timeline for calling for an override or a bond? I'm not sure we're able to talk about it because it's not on the agenda tonight, but that was the other question.
I think it's a fair question to discuss, though. I think in these working sessions,
Well,
and I was
just
going to make a quick
to-
ask, though.
Well,
Do we need a motion to have more of an open conversation, or?
well, we can't discuss should we or should we not.
Well, I
Now,
think.
let me ask a clarifying question here. I'm making an assumption that Jeff is asking that question because whatever decision the board makes could have an impact on whether or not a bond or an override would pass. Okay, so in that vein, what would the timeline be?
Well, I mean, for a November election, the last time I believe we called for it as late as May. Again,
Okay.
should we want to go down that route? I mean, to me, I think we need to get a PAC available. We need to get people talking about, okay, what is the viability? What is all of that? And get that group together that would then come in and make a recommendation about, is it a bond? How much is that? Is it an override? How much, what percentage is that? So that would be, and do we have, and even the assumption of, do we have the people to run it? Do we have the finances in a PAC to run it? What is our likelihood of going out and getting someone who runs elections and is experienced in that in terms of their feedback about what they think the probability of all that is, and then weighing that out with the added expense to the district and the cost of the election and all that. And then ultimately, we can talk about it, we can do all those things, we can advocate will be my better word. Once the board says, yep, we're doing it, then we go to just the facts, nothing but the facts show, and
That would
along
have
those
to
lines.
be a separate agenda item.
Correct.
At one of our
Correct.
board meetings.
Correct.
Yes.
Along with any, I mean, that should
So,
be.
but we
no-
now know
yeah,
what the timeline is.
Exactly.
Okay, Member Walker has another question. What is the current staffing for the PALS and PATH programs? Will we keep the same amount of SPED staff for these programs once on the same campus?
Yeah, so there are federal and state guidelines for staffing programs like that. They actually have to do more with age ranges, not grade ranges necessarily, but ages. So right now, PALS and PATH would both require 2 teachers in each program. Regardless of what school they are housed at, we would need 2 teachers in those programs. So if they were at one school, it would be 2 teachers in each program. If they're at separate schools, it would still be 2 teachers in each program.
Okay.
Now, well, let me just continue. One of the advantages to having them on one campus, though, is when you start to get into your para and support staffing with those things, with those classes, is because the ability to have one campus where you can have multiple paras serving different programs, we could do a lot more push-ins, and again, it would increase our efficiencies along those lines to where we could share staff back and forth.
But isn't there an added pressure or let's say stress to the teachers and the students in large?
To the students
But
at large.
having 2 programs, again, if in fact, let's just play the hypotheticals, you don't properly staff.
Well, we have to properly staff.
Well, again, properly, okay, but again,
That's not an option.
properly staffing and staffing properly for the sake of law and the sake of execution are 2 different things. We would say 2 programs on the same campus.
Yeah, what do you mean?
I'll explain it. So there are ways to staff that keep you compliant. And there are ways to staff to ensure you actually have the productive impact on whatever
Okay.
it is you're trying to do. So for example, what I'm saying is when I say stress to teacher, these students go into general classes, and if not supported correctly and that student happens to have a moment and needs to be reset, that burden gets placed on the teacher and also has impact to the students at large in that. Therefore, it causes a added stress to a teacher that is already stressed between all of the components of their day to day. I'm just saying, have we looked at that? Are we mindful of that? Because again, there's consequences to every action, right? So I'm just trying to make sure that if we're making all these decisions, that all of these things have been thought through thoroughly and as well as possible.
And and again, for 12 years, I managed both programs on a campus, and having that flexibility with aides that serve both groups is a tremendous benefit for exactly what you're talking about, for the benefit of all students and teachers, and having that support. Again, when you start spreading out and not having as much support on 2 different campuses, that can be detrimental as well. It can work both ways, and when done correctly, it's, again, beneficial for all students. Our special ed students get the benefit of their peer interaction. Our peers get the benefit of the special ed interaction as well.
The other part of that I would say is economy of scale. So for instance, right now, let's take PATH at Black Mountain. When those kids do push in, they're pushing into one of 2 classrooms at that grade level because there's 2 teachers. Depending on the makeup of that class, they may only push into one of those classes because of other things in another class. When we're looking at it for next year, you're pushing into 4 different classrooms. And so being able to spread out that push in to where it's not the same teacher that always is receiving that kid for their, peer-to-peer opportunities for interactions, things like that. So the economy of scale allows you to do that a little bit better.
So many questions. If we make an assumption right now that, let's assume, two campuses are closed. At the last work study, there was a mention of something that could be done at one campus. The other campus, it might take a year to get it up and running. So,
You mean options for?
yes.
Okay.
Okay. So that being the case, if it's going to take a year to get a program up and running, it seems like, well, the expense for the building, whether there's a program in it or not, there's still going to be that expense. So how do you justify closing a campus, keeping a building dark for a year, and then moving forward when we're still going to incur expenses, but we're going to disrupt a community?
So in terms of the, I'm thinking you're talking about the special ed,
Yeah.
the special ed group.
Yes.
That would not take us a year to get a student or 2 or 5 or 10 into that building. So we could have that happen in August. Before it became robust enough to pull more kids back, that's what would take a year to start going. So right now, what we would be looking at is, let's not send any more students away, because every time there's a situation that goes on, we have to send them away. Instead of sending more students away, we would stop doing that, put them at this campus instead, let's say Desert Sun. And so we could have something there tomorrow, if we wanted to have something there tomorrow.
Okay.
It wouldn't be robust and bringing back some of our level D and some of our more severe students until later.
Okay, if we could do that now, none of these campuses are at capacity. So what's stopping us from doing it right now? Why haven't we done that this year? Because that seems like that would have been a way to cut back on some of our
So we
expenditures.
are with one student right
Okay.
now. And again, I think the purpose of moving it to a different campus would be so that we have occupancy. I mean, that's truly, there's no reason that it couldn't be here, but it would be that so we could have occupancy.
Well,
if
Other
they
than
close
wanting
the
it,
school.
I mean, there is a point to have it, especially if you're moving towards a level D program, of having their own campus and things like that. Even speaking in terms of it being dark for a year, as you brought up earlier, we took into account not saving all the money from facilities in that. If you're not in a building, you're also not wearing and tearing on a building that year and promoting its continuous.
You still have
upkeep in that.
expenses, you still have your insurance, you still have your utilities.
Well,
Well, you still have to pay something to the trust. We're still paying to the trust, but there's still going to be hard costs for the building regardless.
Right, you would save on teachers, you would save on office staff, you would save on administration, you'd save on a lot on custodial, on cafeteria, campus tech,
well, and respectfully, I mean.
a lot of the others.
Right,
Okay.
the savings is in the consolidation and staffing efficiencies and all of that, more so than even, right now, we've cut way back on ABM supports and custodial supports over years
Okay.
of ongoing cost savings. So that's not as big as the other one.
Now, going back to the SPED Academy, if that's the right way to
Sure.
call it. As I understand it, to have levels C and D students, there's some certifications that we would have to have from the state.
We would do an application for the
Okay.
EDP program. If we wanted to have the EDP program, we would need to do an application for that, yes.
Okay, so please explain what the EDP program is.
That's for students with extreme emotional disorders,
Okay, so to get
PB in private, there you go.
these levels C and D, we have to fill out an application. Is it fill out the application and the state says, okay, you dotted all the i's, crossed all the t's, here's your certificate? Or is there they come out, do inspections, they do whatever due diligence, where it's not just fill the application out and you're good to go?
I'm sure there would be, I suppose it depends on the day right now at the state. So I'm sure they would come out and they would do some observations. I mean,
Well,
it depends on who's overseeing that department on any given week, I guess, at this point in time.
Part of where I think the board kind of struggles is, I get dealing with the state as sort of a moving target, but those are details that impact what your plan's going to be. And so and you can't say, yeah, the state's going to come back in 60 days, but to be a little more, taking Dan's word, transparent about this is what the process involves, because ultimately you're asking us to take that leap of faith, but we need to know what's involved in that leap of faith, because otherwise we're going to be jumping off a cliff, and it's a really long way down to the bottom.
So right now, the most transparent I can be is to say I would not bank on an EDP program there next year. I would bank on saving some of our students who we right now send to AZ Aspire, which is a little bit just more of an alternative setting. So it would keep us from sending students who we're currently outplacing for special ed purposes, but they're not in that extreme severe state.
Okay.
So it's not going to save us 5 million, well, it might be 5 million, but it's not going to save us that 5 million, but it's going to keep us from spending 2 million.
So we're spending $2 million with AZ Aspire.
Just in currently all the private placements, we have 30 students in private placement right now. On average, somewhere about $80,000 per student is what it is. So about 2.4 is what we're projecting. Of course, it kind of varies based upon what services they receive that month.
Okay, so those students would save 2.4 million.
Well, it would
It
be a
would-
process of bringing some back. There's 10
Okay.
students right now that we're placing, and this is part of the special ed and working with Ms. Gregory and talking about some of the expenses, because we are looking at, pushing upwards, again, could be by the end of the year, over $8 million on special education expenses this year. Part of that, realizing pretty much our IDA grant is already used. Our Medicaid funds are close to being fully used, if not over, based upon some of the refunds we're waiting on. And then the rest eats into M&O. So what we looked at with Ms. Gregory is we began with this one student who was going to be outplaced or had potential outplacement to AZ Aspire. And then we are servicing that student here within district. So that was the start of it. As we've had discussions, as I've watched this budget, and again in my first year, I've looked at this budget going, we are spending quite a bit of money here in placing students who have OHI, which is again something we should be able to service in-house. And if you do talk to AZ Aspire, they will even say we have some students that are placed with them that there is no reason they should be placed outside.
Some reasons may be legal.
Yeah.
So there are different things that go on that cause that placement, but ultimately, right, the goal of bringing back all the students we can to serve them and serve them well within house.
So I understand, I totally get, it's cheaper for us to bring them back. So there's the savings. Is our expense to educate those kids factored into what that savings is? So, we're spending $80,000 per student. So we bring back one student. Is that, bottom line, a net, we're going to save $80,000, or do we factor in what education cost is?
Well, I mean, and that's why starting small in those positions that were proposed to the board at the last meeting were important. So the first position being, a para position, but the para position is kind of para position on steroids for the needs of some of those students. So we looked at that, and that's why that was put up, as well as there would be at least one teacher needing to start. So if we estimate that at $130,000, $140,000, 2 students bringing back, we've already kind of recaptured at least those 2 students at $80,000 piece. So that's why it's important also, and in talks and
let's even talk about funding, because again, we need to serve our students. We want to serve these students. Those students deserve all of the best. And yes, while we get some increased funding from the state, it is by nowhere near the same cost or the same funding that would cover the cost of those programs. So, and then again, I would actually argue that's whether it's in-house or out-of-house. Out-of-house certainly adds more on top of that, but again, I firmly believe we can do a better job for our kids than placing them out, given the right staffing, given the right scenarios and that, and so that's a direction we'd like to explore.
Well, and that's kind of
continue
part
on.
of your vision, I think, with the comprehensive school.
100%.
Is that we're able to service our students. And I think part of looking at, and what Mr. Dolezal spoke about with that vision is that's comprehensive for all, not just the gen ed students, but also our special education students, where they have the ability to be in Cave Creek as a Cave Creek student, rather than AZ Aspire as a Cave Creek student.
And they grow academically, physically, in the arts, and taken care of mental health wise.
For the last couple of years, hiring special ed teachers has been a challenge.
And it
Putting
will
it-
continue to be so
Okay.
around the country.
So how do you foresee having adequate staff with our situation? You know, we're not, paying teachers so much that they're lining up at the door.
Well, Dr. Hendrickson, I'll ultimately refer to you a little bit, but I'd also go along the lines, if you're just unfortunately, with the special ed shortage, we've had to resort to hiring a lot of contracted teachers.
And that's
Well, correct. But hiring one contracted teacher, that is expensive, that's $100,000, 2 students with that teacher, give me another number, 120?
115 to 165.
So 115, again, if we're bringing back 2 students at that point in time, if we're bringing back 3, it becomes an economy of scale, and we don't wind up saving money, even if that costs us more from that. I don't know if that.
Yeah, and the other thing that we've already had some discussions on is with those positions, knowing that there's a lot more work that goes into working with those students, not just as a pair, as a teacher, is either doing a hard-to-fill stipend that's a lot larger than what we currently have, that's more competitive than other districts around us, or bumping up the base for that positions for that alternative placement teacher. And so being competitive with that, knowing that, again, $80,000 for each student that we're bringing in allows us to save that money with it. And so finding what is that happy medium between, what does our competitors pay for positions like that? What would a contractor be? What is that happy medium that we can find that says, hey, we're still saving more than a contractor, we're paying more than it would be if it was just kind of a gen ed teacher on our pay scale. So that's one of the things that we are looking at with it.
And giving opportunities to even our current teachers if they wanted to do that and they wanted to move over there for that. Because again, if you're talking about vision, you're talking about what makes Cave Creek special. It is the teachers that have been here and have woven themselves into the fabric of this community. Because that's why they stay. You ask why they stay, I would respectfully argue it's not my vision, it's because they've woven themselves into the fabric of this community and become an integral part of it, and that's what ropes them here and that's what keeps them here.
The other thing I would say is one of the things that we've been asked when it comes to like this EDP or these private placement students is, don't we have spaces, throughout all of our buildings and campuses that we could house these students? If there's an empty classroom down the hall, that's an old part of this, Cave Creek School. Yeah, there's some classrooms there is that. However, it doesn't get us to the point that we need to consolidate in order to see massive savings. So yes, we don't necessarily need a building to start with bringing 2, 3, 4 kids back. We could do that now. It doesn't get us to the massive savings that results from consolidating schools.
Which that consolidation also helps special ed too, because we've had this last spring, we had a lot of our resource teachers jumping from school to school because they didn't have enough at their school to complete a caseload, so they were spending part of their week at one school and part of their week at another school. And while we can do that every time we do it, they're not really part of either community. They feel very disjointed.
So is there, again, probably be good if we could get like a financial model of it, because if I'm hearing it, it sounds like, yes, there's 2.5 and growing to grab, but at the same point in time, there might be a front load in order to stabilize and see a profit long term, or is it instant profit?
Well, again, I don't think I would talk about it in terms of profit because it's really,
Or-
that's
or-
not our, but is it in
or-
terms of every kid we can bring back, we are saving the money from outsourcing them. Again, I just would not refer to it in terms of profit. It would be.
And I think what you're talking about, we have vacant positions open that are encumbered within our budget. So,
Well, don't go there. Hold on. Let me try.
I'm trying to answer your question.
Oh, I was gonna say, do you want me more clarity, maybe?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
So is there a front-loaded cost? Yes, there is a cost to it, but again, already currently in our budget, there are vacant positions which would more than cover that cost. And again, moving that contractor, moving one contractor out and then filling it in-house, we would see savings on that.
Okay, but then I gotta ask the question: which budget?
Which budget?
Well, because sarcasm. If we're sitting here talking about closing schools, we don't have money, we're trying to right side the ship, but it's in our budget, but should it be in our budget? Meaning, are we focused on we're starting to stray. Are we focused on the right thing or the wrong thing? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out, because you're talking about it's in our budget, but we're trying to find ways that we may have to remedy right-siding our budget if things go a certain way or we do things and have other consequences we didn't forecast. So are we setting ourselves up for success or failure by attacking this model? That's what I'm trying to understand. Because it sounds like there's a front-loaded expense on the hopes that we capture.
There's no hope we capture. It's we don't send out our students.
Okay,
There's
so the
no
$2.5
hope of
million.
capture. We're not going out to a marketplace and buying students.
Okay, so we're not losing any more than what we've lost. So what you're saying is potentially that let's call it those 10 students that represent 2.5 million.
30.
30, 2.5 million. We're not focused on getting those back. That's just a luxury. But what we're saying is we're trying to keep the forward burn from happening of adding that, making that 30 into 40 to 50 to 60 is what you're saying.
I'd say both. So currently, when at an IEP meeting, when they're looking at for services for that student and how do we service that student, if we don't have those services here, we're then required to outplace them. Okay. So it's a combination of, as they get into those meetings, saying, oh, yep, this is the service model the student needs. We can do it here now at this new program. And then as those students that are at that outplacement, as they have their annual IEP meetings, we can say, this student, based on where they're at right now, can we service them back here? Yes, we can now say we service them back here. Some that are there because of litigation, and that's the placement that they get, so we can't bring them back, but there's probably several students that are currently outplaced because we didn't have the service model here. Now that we have it, we can start bringing those kids back.
And they all represent 80,000 per head. Or is that just like up to?
No, that's
Is that an average?
That is an average.
Average, okay.
There are some and there may be some students that us being able to service them would be down the road even further than that, because their needs are so severe or so specialized that it may not be, that following year. It may be, and it may be. There could be a student that we never get to that level necessarily. But can we keep our students here and service them?
And there will be students like the medically fragile students and so forth that we can't service, but.
And to be clear, we don't get 80,000 for them. We're spending 80,000.
No, I
So
got
it's no matter what, we're losing money on them, whether we're doing the program or whether we're spending them away. Special ed is basically like a constant negative.
There's a
in
cost
terms
for
of
not
money.
retaining, is what you're saying. There's an expense for not retaining.
Yes.
Yeah, I got you.
I think Dan used the word profit, and what I see in my mind perhaps is just recapturing funds and creating a surplus
There you
in
go.
one area that was our money to begin with. So not profit, because that's not approved in the educational area. Am I right? Like that was
No, you're tracking. That's
kind of the use of the word. So
that's why I had to re-ask it.
kind of coming back to my first question about the vision, like I like where this is going in terms of just looking at Desert Sun, for instance, putting Lone Mountain aside for a minute, but it sounds to me like there's been some work done on a pretty good plan, a rough outline of a plan of how we could use that facility in a positive way. That, yeah, there's some initial upfront, but the ability, it sounds like, to recapture those funds and create a surplus that could help our budget is very viable without a whole lot of effort. That's not the right word. Is that correct?
Yes, the one thing I think we need to be careful on is that the closing of the school is not putting the program in there is not going to bring us in more money. It might stop bleeding a little bit more. But we could, just go with me on this thought experiment, we could close the schools and not do anything with them. And we will be financially ahead and we can give our teachers a raise next year. So I think that's what we've got to keep it separate. And that's why initially it started with phase 1 and phase 2. And then because everybody wanted phase 2, it got blended together. So we could stop and leave 2 schools completely empty, let them whatever, and we would be money ahead because we would stop being inefficient. We're no longer spending money on classrooms and on office staff and on administration and all of these extra programs. They would be consolidated over to 3 campuses. So that's where the real savings is. The other stuff is, okay, now you've got these 2 vacant buildings. What are you going to do with them? And I'm not into business, and I'm like going way in over my head here, but I would say my gut tells me that if somebody wanted to come in and rent, or lease, that's what you call it, lease DSA, or whatever school, and pay us a lot of money, that's going to pay more than any program that we would put there in terms of special ed. Because we would then say, okay, great, you can do that, and we will find another place for that special ed program. There's nothing so special about that DSA that we need it for that. If somebody out there in the community had a better idea, like that's where I feel like we just have to keep phase 1 and phase 2 separate, because phase 1 is what saves us the money and gets our teachers a raise and puts us right side up. Phase 2 is all of the
Right, I understand that.
next steps.
However, if we're going to do a phase 1, then we need to then quickly move to phase 2 to figure out what we're doing with these others. But, and so my point is, it sounds to me like we
could-
kind of have a working plan for a phase 2 possibility for Desert Sun.
Yes.
And something that would, in addition to what we would save by closing, something that would recapture funds that we're already spending, that would add to that budget.
That's perfect, yeah.
Okay.
Nope, that's a perfect way of putting it.
Because, in looking at this, I keep hearing, that we've learned a lot after dams and the closing. And kind of my question is, really? Like, what have we learned? And the reason I say that is because it was closed with no plan. It's an albatross, quite frankly. And if we're going to go out and ask for bonds and overrides, we need to be able to face the community and say, guess what? We didn't add 2 more albatrosses to the community, because there's a lot of people outside of kids in the district that live in those communities where those vacant schools are going to be, and they're not going to be happy. And I know this is a separate issue, but at the same time, it's something that's going to come up with bonds and overrides. Why should we support your bond and override if this is what you're doing, again, with no viable plan? So that's kind of where I was going with, that could be something that we could posture out there that would be beneficial in a lot of ways.
Well, and Vice President Ulmer, I would add to that, it's really hard to go out for any one of those measures and say 50% of our schools are not occupied and not being utilized. And when they're talking about efficiencies and government spending and kind of the rhetoric that's going through not only our community but across the country, and that to look at someone and say, yes, we'd like you to pass an override, but only half of our 5 schools are being used at this point in time, that's a tough sell. In the same vein. So some of the things we've learned is we're actually left money in a budget to continue to operate, to continue to maintain, to continue to keep the lights on, the water's on, to keep it clean. Those were things that weren't necessarily there before. Going out and again, having meetings with different, I've mentioned, and I won't necessarily remember them all, but ROI Investments, a property company. We've had meetings set up with different, we've looked at housing companies in terms of that. Can we put affordable housing on? What do long-term leases look like for that? Again, because it'll be up to the board, but I don't know that we want to get into the business of being long-term landlords. So there are opportunities to do that. Those are being explored at an initial level across the board for all of our properties.
Have we looked at liquidating?
That's part of this process as well, because at some point, we would need to look at those properties and go, okay, we're not seeing a revenue, we're not seeing a savings, we're not seeing that. So at that point in time,
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, liquidating in where we're at today kind of seems more viable in the sense of putting cash back to the bottom, depending on, obviously, how deed structure is. Like I said, talk about a crash course in chaos. There's no, I mean, talk about, yeah. But how do we, and I get one before the other, but unfortunately, it's not a luxury we have. We kind of got to work it all in tandem so that we can be informed, because one decision does spur. I mean, we're talking about closing schools. There's a lot of factors. It's not so clean. Yes, we could sit there and say close them both and we're profitable. But if that fallout happens a little bit more negative.
again, I don't like the word profitable, but
Well, okay,
but
well,
I
let me
but I
write
hear
this.
you.
Let's just say
Dan?
this: financially responsible. We're trying to show ourselves being financially responsible. I'll use that word. How's that? So we're trying to be financially responsible, but are we, when we're talking about making some decisions that have financial consequences? Because again, if we get too aggressive, too hard, too fast, and make the wrong move, we just signaled we probably are the district you need to flee. And that's highly concerning to me. And we can sit there and say, just because people send emails and say, if you don't give me my way, I'm leaving. I get the merit of going, well, will you really? I'm like, you're dancing with the devil if you want to play the bluff. And so I just want to make sure that we do have all the big picture, because ultimately it is on the board. Like, it's on our hands. And,
It's part of our norms is to trust the administration. And so, as the board, we're looking to the administration to bring us a clearly defined path for where we're going, what we need to do and where we're going. And you've articulated it extremely well, what we need to do. We need to close schools. Okay, you've articulated that. The path beyond that is what we need some definition on, because the last thing I want to see happen is to have more empty buildings that eventually get to the point where I don't know what we're going to do with it, and it just sits there, it decays, and it becomes an obsolete building that will cost us more to fix than tear down. We can't afford to have 3 buildings like that.
And agreed. Can we afford to have 5 buildings open as well? Like that's the other side,
No.
and that's the position we find ourselves in, and working through.
But having 1 or 2 additional empty buildings, having it sit there empty, it's a liability, period. And so what are we going to do with it? We closed Desert Arroyo, and yeah, it was going to save us X amount of dollars, but the ongoing cost of that building was something that the district did not consider. And over time, the expense of that building exponentially grew to the point where it's out of our control.
Which is why some of the experts in this room, in this community, and that, again, meeting with these different, and as you brought up earlier, we need a group that's regularly meeting, whether it's quarterly, whatever, to examine these things and look, what is the savings, what is all of that we've got going, okay, and at what point in time, whether it's board, Mr. Dolezal, whoever's here, whatever, it's time to liquidate,
We're coming,
and that, so yes. Again, I know it's got a bad taste in people's mouth, but that is the Phase 2 committee that keeps going on from not just one little time. It's got to be something that is an ongoing process in terms of constantly looking at what is the viability of all of these things, and when is it time to do that.
The other thing to add is when we had the facilities management group come out and they did the study and then presented to the facility focus group, they talked about 2 ways to close down a school. You can decommission it, or you can abandon it. And he did the work with the district for many years, and essentially Desert Oreo was abandoned. It was lock the door, shut off the lights, and walk away, as opposed to decommissioning, keeping the air at a certain temperature, making sure the facilities team is going through, running water through drains, things like that, servicing, different components on an ongoing basis, and that's what's built into Ryan's budget. Of it's not 100% savings on maintenance from closing these schools. It's I think you had it at a 70% savings. So there's still some cost built in to maintain these buildings moving forward to avoid.
And there were some of the buildings that were leased out. Again, Bella Vista was a tenant for some years, and like you had pointed out earlier, it was written into their lease that they would cover the maintenance and upkeep of the buildings that they were in as part of that. But yes, to me, that is an absolute ongoing, community meeting. I was fortunate. I met with Cave Creek and Carefree's city manager and towns planner. We've got Scottsdale on the books coming up. I'm just looking at, and they've been very appreciative and cooperative in terms of helping to participate in those types of things moving forward as well, along with the other experts in our community. I know we've had several volunteer.
Do you all feel like maybe, I know that was factored into the calculations in terms of our overall savings, and so do you feel like maybe that number needs to be drawn out more clearly, or?
Well, the more clear you want to make numbers, we'll never argue with that. I mean, but my recollection, initially, when dams was closed, the utilities were still, like the AC was on at whatever, and then it got to the point where the plug was just pulled. I don't want that to end up being the scenario, because initially out the gate, hey, this is not a problem, we can, maintain this building, it's going to be great. And then the day came where, oops, it wasn't so great. And now here we are with that unfortunate albatross. We don't need two more.
Well, and that's the other piece in the budget, to kind of piggyback on that. Is it factored all of the moving parts of these moves? Because you have teachers that have to move their classroom. There's a cost associated to it. Facts or feelings or whatever the statement is, there's teachers that are paying out of pocket to do stuff in their classrooms, which I scratch my head with. So do we have that factored in to make sure their classrooms are being rebuilt the way they want them to, whatever the case may be? Are all those things considered? We have smart boards. We have all these things we've invested in. Are all those things a factor in the equation? Or are these going to be gotcha moments in the budget? I know you're digging in pretty good, so I'm maybe teeing that one up for you a little bit, because I know you've done some of the factoring from what we've sat down and looked at.
No, I do have a pot of auxiliary funds to utilize for this, so that's on that cash side. That between like the rental pieces, cell phone tower pieces, that we can more than cover actually PVs, the cost PV encumbered with that. So that little.
And we want to use
little
those
bit is
civic
there.
funds or the cash side funds so we can actually do a better job tracking what the actual M&O savings is, as opposed to taking it in and out of there. That'll give us a better idea of the actual savings from M&O.
Have we thought about asking for any partnerships or donations for any of that? Like, I know somebody with a moving company who might volunteer to give time. Have we, maybe we should draw up a list. That's for a different time, but
Christmas list.
of what's needed.
$38 million.
Yeah.
Well, I will say
1.6
one of
field.
the I guess heartwarming things as we were meeting as a focus group is the teachers knowing that whatever the decision is, we got to support all teachers going back to bills together, and where we had teachers going, hey, we need to pull teachers from all sites together to support these teachers in the move. If it means coming over, helping take stuff down, box things up, move things over. So we already had teachers express that, working with the high school, I don't know if it's National Honor Society or student government or whatnot. And so I think, as we get closer to that, definitely leveraging all of the other assets and to where we can not only financially compensate our teachers for having to make this move, but also take some of that burden off them wherever we can.
Can we, my only ask in that situation is, when we get there, we're doing that, but can we do that a little bit more front-loaded? Because I think there is some opportunity for empathy in our district. Again, you all see the same emails. there are things going on where I think we could do a little bit better job at empathy, making sure that other, people are being respectful of the fact no decision has been made. So
Correct.
asking for equipment or pillaging or withholding subscription funds or whatever that might be, can we just make sure we're double downing on unreasonable hospitality this time? I think that would go a long way.
Do you have a question?
I think I just made a statement, so you
Okay.
can skip me. I'll come back around. I mean,
Does Jeff have another question?
No, that was it for him.
Okay.
I want to be respectful.
All right, Member Walker's next question is regarding potential grade reconfigurations. Will ECS offer after-school programs at Sonoran Trails?
Well, they will certainly look into the need and the demand. I can tell you historically, ECS has attempted for years and years programming at Sonoran Trails, and there's not been enough interest to staff a daily program. Once they get to the middle school, many times they're doing clubs after school or athletics. So that would absolutely be something, and ECS has planned to look at and explore. Is that a need, or do parents want it? Is there enough students to actually run a program?
Moving on to transportation. Let's assume 2 schools are closed, 6th grade goes to Sonoran Trails. How is transportation going to be impacted? Will there be a rise in our expense? And in addition to that, I'll just ask the second question. We have routes right now where buses aren't anywhere near full. So what do we do about that? Because sending a big bus to take 4 kids to Cactus Shadows doesn't really seem efficient.
Well, and that's conversations that I constantly have with our transportation department and Pam. And they have to have buses available for X amount of kids who say they're going to take the bus, whether they take the bus or not. As far as impacting transportation, we've had discussions with some of the routes already to Sonoran Trails are pretty full going there, so there may need to be a second route that is run in conjunction with the current Sonoran Trails routes if 6th grade does move over. But again, we're still servicing the same amount of kids but in less places. And so really too, if you look at our Rio Verde side, that's only a mile down the road, another extra 5 minutes, so that part's not going to have much of an impact. So, working with Pam, the feasibility is just like any other school year. We'll sit down, balance the routes out when we know, what kids are going where, and we don't foresee a transportation problem at all.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the teachers being forced to reapply and seniority issues and all of that. I come from an industry that was based on seniority, so I don't fully understand that. I know there's a lot of questions around that and a lot of hurt feelings and resentment and a lot of that, so I'd love to see that addressed, how that plays in and how it's determined and all of that.
Yeah, so, Member Walker,
That's Ulmer.
Ulmer, sorry,
That's all right.
one letter over.
UW.
So I pulled, so currently in our kind of previous policy and current policy, there's not much language as far as what does the transfer process look like and what factors can and cannot be included into it. The RIF process, there is legislation that says what can and can't be done, but for the transfer process there isn't. So I brought together representatives from all of our elementary sites and CCA reps to say, how do we make this work? How do we make it to where we're honoring the teachers that are having to be moved and allowing them to have a voice and choice in it, but also at the same time as a building principal, you're responsible for putting together the teams that will have the biggest impact on your campus as well. And so through that meeting that I held with them, we kind of mapped out how it should look. So number one, making sure we're surveying our teachers, saying, is there a particular grade band or grades that you want to teach? This is your bread and butter. This is where you find success. Is there a particular school that you want to go to should this occur? And capturing where they want to be, and then giving them an opportunity to make their first, second, and third choice. And it could be, first grade at Black Mountain, second grade Black Mountain, third grade. They want Black Mountain, and they're good with any of those grades. From there, what we would do is administration cabinet would work with those administrators, say, okay, here's the openings that we know we have. We're also going to be surveying teachers of who's not going to be returning next year, getting those letters, not that we want them to resign, but getting those letters of resignations early so we have a good map of where all of our positions will be at. And then starting to match up those teachers with what they're desired. If they're the only teacher that's interested in that position, they're moving to that position. If there's only one position and there's multiple teachers, what that committee agreed on is it needs to be up to the principal at the end of the day to say who is the best fit for this team and who is going to be successful when they come over, and making sure we're setting up that teacher for success. And so when we talked about how does that principal determine it, one of the things is I'm hearing this rumor that we're going to have to reapply and interview. There's no physical reapplication beyond this is what I'm interested in, a quick Google form. And really it's that it's more of a meet and greet that I will be working with Patty to say, here's the constraints of this meet and greet. It's not a sit down with a group of teachers and I'm going to go through 10 interview questions and I'm scoring you on it. It is not going to be that, and that's what the committee said clearly, is that this has to be stress-free for those teachers. So it's an opportunity for that teacher to meet the principal, understand their philosophy, what they're about, making sure it's a good fit for them as a teacher, for the principal to understand this is the person's strengths. And then to be able to say, hey, I know you're interested in first grade. The first grade team is down the hall. Why don't you go meet that first grade team? Or is that someone that you mesh with, because they're going to spend more time at school than they're at home with their families. So do you find that you're going to mesh with them? Or there may be opportunities to that, saying, hey, I noticed that you have really strong leadership capabilities in what you've done. Are you interested in, I know you said first grade, what's your interest in second grade? Because I got a few new teachers there that I really think that you would be a strong mentor to. And maybe there's some conversation with that teacher that's transferring over to help find that fit. But again, when we look at the number of teachers and being placed, for Black Mountain for the most part, they have currently 2 teachers at each grade level. A couple sections they have 3. They're going to be going up to 4. So in kindergarten, you have 2 kindergartners at Black Mountain, 2 at Lone Mountain. For the most part, you're going to have all 4 of those at Black Mountain together. Again, there's some movement with resignations that we've already received. I'm meeting with teachers currently that are on emergency alternative certs. They're kind of set to the side because legally they're on a 1-year contract kind of thing. So I think for the most part, our teachers are going to find that they're getting that first and second choice and blending teams together.
And we do need to see ultimately where the students go. And
Yes.
We've got, whatever schools close, there is that opportunity to open enroll anywhere in the district. So, so not only surveying the staff in terms of that, but even getting from students, this is where we're headed, so we have a better idea of what positions are at which school.
So, trying to figure this one out. Most of the recommendations coming from the focus group, correct? And committees. This is kind of where you guys are landing on all of your decisioning.
Well, that was what was presented
Well, I'm going to say collectively, so hear me out. Collectively. So as a
Collectively,
cabinet,
we're gathering input, whether it's from a focus group or whether it's a committee that someone meets with. We're getting input from people, and then ultimately, we're bringing a recommendation based on that forward to you.
okay. So from each one of you, maybe a question. From your optics, from your own point, not saying focus group, not saying committee, not saying any of those things, what is your outlook on the ask, and would you change anything? Whoever wants to start.
I would have brought you a different recommendation, and I think we have evidence of that this year in terms of, we could speak to the calendar in terms of what was said, and I sat there and said, this does not meet with my moral compass nor what I am comfortable recommending, so this is my recommendation to the governing board. So if it was not sitting in that spot for me, as much as, regardless of whether I like it or it's comfortable or I want to do it, I will only bring you things that I believe are in the best interest of the district and go along with what I believe. I believe that's what you hired me for, and I'm not going to compromise myself or my personal beliefs in terms of what is best for the district. We might agree to disagree and have a debate and all of those things, but ultimately, as the person tasked with bringing a recommendation to you, that's where I sit.
Okay.
I'm just going to concur as well. I think the work that the focus group did and all the data and research that they put into it, knowing that regardless of what you do, there's a gamble with any school that you close. There's some fallout that will happen. I think what we then ultimately recommended based on the focus group moving forward, I definitely 100% stand behind. What I do not stand behind is having to make cuts that put more on the backs of our teachers, that deprive students of having a well-rounded, enriched education with the electives, with the specials, things like that. That's where it gets very hard, where we say if we don't close any, we close one, we still have to get to the bottom line of the budget. And now, instead of impacting groups of students, two groups of teachers on a short term as they get settled in their new environment, we're now impacting all staff, all students district-wide, because we have to make up for the budget cuts somewhere.
And I would just quickly add that even my change in the recommendation coming at a later hour in terms of moving a school to all one site instead of splitting, again, listen and went with what is right in my mind, and that so that would be another example of a change in terms of that. Member Moore.
I would just say, truly, kind of what Dr. Hendrickson said. I think fiscal responsibility is key in realigning this, and walking into this in July is one of those things where looking at the budget and just saying living beyond our means. I think it is important that we do get within that budget and we operate within that. Now, again, you are the board. I leave it up to you to decide how are we going to do that. Is that one school closure, two, no school closures? Is it going to be cuts somewhere else in the budget, and where are those cuts going to come from? And as Dr. Hendrickson said, is it going to impact all schools? Is it going to impact one? Is it going to impact two? Is it going to impact the high school? So that's kind of the decision I know there's the recommendations for you, but that's going to be the decision that
Are we
really
going to eat in more to carry over than we expected, and whether that's DAA or
and
NLL?
are we going to get things upright so in FY 27 or 28 we aren't in the negative situation? So that again, I just would like to reiterate what they said, but also that this hard decision is going to have to be made one way or the other.
Yeah, I think going into it, I knew after we failed our last override, we needed to close multiple schools. I think when it became personal, probably somewhere early this fall, when I started to realize it was going to be my kid's school, the school where I was formerly a principal at, that was hard, and I grieved. I mean, I think I was in denial at first. I was angry, all of those things. And but I've kind of come to the realization when I look at the numbers, when I look at the SFD, when I look at all of that, and I feel like I've seen everything on the back end that I could possibly see, that 100% I'm behind it and ready to move forward and move on and put my kid at the next best school. My fear is if we don't make the change, I don't know what the outlook will be for my own children personally, because like I said before, the shell that we will be leaving behind because of the other cuts we have to make, I feel like we will not be recognizable as a comprehensive school district. And so at that point, I don't know that the vision will be obtainable. It will be turning into something that we're just trying to live another day. And I don't want to just try to live another day. I want to try to get out and have that comprehensive school and all of those comprehensive schools where we help all children learn, not just some of them. Right now, I feel like we do have a large group that's, maybe not a large group, a group that's refusing to allow themselves to grieve. And I know that's hard. I mean, I've gone through it myself. But I think at a certain point, we have to jump on board and get on with the next steps and move on. One of the phrases that has kind of come out in my head is, we can't privilege a few at the cost of everyone else. And I feel like that's what we're kind of asking to do if we don't make 2 school closures.
Okay. Go ahead. Did you have a?
No, I said thanks.
This is another question from Member Walker. If moving sixth grade to Sonoran Trails is passed, will current fifth graders get their own future Stinger Day, shadow on campus, and also participate with their sixth grade peers for end-of-year celebrations such as Black Mountain goes to UCYC? Will sixth graders be invited?
Yes. Not the camp.
And if I can combine, both of these are about Sonoran Trails, including if sixth grade goes to Sonoran Trails, are they able to try out for sports that are offered and all of that? So yes, historically, when middle schools were sixth or eighth grade, sixth graders could try out for athletics. There are sports that are no cut, so they could participate in track and cross country, as well as try out for any of the sports that are available there. I know some of the Sonoran Trails teams have been relatively small, so I think it would even be a welcome addition to be able to boost up those numbers and give those sixth graders opportunities as well. And then following up on yours, yes, there will be a date for rising sixth graders to come through and tour Sonoran Trails. They've already got plans to potentially host another parent night, should that be the direction that the board goes. I actually believe we should task Sonoran Trails with coming up with a new tradition, because again, like that UCYC trip at the end of the year, those are things that are booked out in advance. So a couple of different opportunities for sixth graders. Currently, sixth graders don't have the opportunity to go on some of the middle school trips. I don't remember where this summer is, but I know there's been Spain. I know there's been, they've done different trips. So they would actually be eligible for that. And then also really look to Mr. Boggs and the team up there about what may become a sixth grade tradition. We had different traditions of field trips in the past. Sixth grade used to go down to Tucson and do the biosphere and all of that. So what are the opportunities to create some of those sixth grade traditions that would be at the middle school, instead of trying to jam something in and put it on the elementaries there, really be able to do a nice trip or a nice tradition with planning and appropriate for there. But then, yes, our elementary principals are also aware of a year-end celebration for our fifth graders as well.
All right. This is kind of speaking to rumors that are flying around in the community. Moving students from Lone Mountain to Black Mountain, is there truly enough classrooms? And, it's been rumored, there's going to be classes in a closet. I've heard that.
It was fun commentary.
But
I went out to the campus, and I have a follow-up question to maybe hone that in if you guys don't mind.
Are you okay with that?
I'm fine.
Okay.
I didn't mean to hijack, but
That's all right. That's
I
what
figured
this
why
is
not go
for.
put your own eyes on it. When you make that move, now obviously trying to visualize the board, right? You're going to move sixth grade to Sonoran Trails. So you have opening, and then you're going to move Lone Mountain. Let's just say you get 100% occupancy there. Mm-hmm. Are you in that factoring? Because again, we can make classrooms out of the dance room, we can make classrooms out of the cafeteria. Everything's spec'd technically. So how are you? I think the question really there for the parents is how are you respectfully doing that to where you're not impeding on some of the components that are critical to that school operating at capacity?
So, number one, we too physically walked. I worked there for many years, but it's been, there's been some changes since that time. So physically walked, and told these guys as we were walking, I don't want to touch any of the elective courses, none of the dance room, the cafeteria, none of those. All of that stays in place because that is part of Black Mountain. So having done that, there are clearly 3 buildings where there are 8. Again, if you're talking everybody comes, we're talking about 4 classrooms K through 5. That would be the need. There are buildings with more than 8 available spaces to house K1. Another building has more than 8 rooms to appropriately house 2-3, and another building has more than 8 rooms to appropriately house 4-5.
And that's considering equal rooms, not because there's a couple, they're not closets, but there's a couple, there's a couple little smaller rooms, if you will.
Well, so
I'm just
those size rooms are actually perfect for whether it's special ed or related services, OTPT. So we looked at all of that. Is there appropriate space for all of those different programs? Are there rooms for PALS, and is there room for PATH? Right. So are those all available there? And again, similar to you, walked every building. I'm sure Mr. Owsley had lots of questions about why are 4 cabinet people walking through. All of that, but it was because I physically, and I wanted them to come too, so there were 4 sets of different eyes. Is this actually doable? Because I'm not going to the board and going to change my recommendation if it is not actually doable. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yes.
Well, it's really not my question. I was just trying to
Well,
give some context.
does that
Sorry.
answer your question and then your follow-up? Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you.
I was just trying to.
No, I appreciate it. Your turn. We got about a half hour.
Real quick, if I can add on, and that doesn't, it's doable and then some in that there's still spaces left over. It's not to where we have occupied every single space. We're maxed out at capacity. Again, remember it's built for 800, 900 students. It had over 1,000 at one point as a high school. So there is still space availability. May not be all full classroom spaces, but if a speech teacher is working with a small group of students, they don't need a full-size classroom. They need a good space to be able to work, and they would all have dedicated spaces for that.
Question from the community. Was the decision to keep Desert Willow open influenced by the Spanish immersion program and the 84 open enrollment students it attracts? Are these students' needs being prioritized over those of Cave Creek resident students?
Well, I will take that. I think, yes, the committee looked at all of those different factors. Once a student signs up, and again, even once a student signs on to be a CCUSD student, they're a CCUSD student. So are their needs prioritized over anyone here? No, the needs of our CCUSD students are prioritized over someone who's out of district or not coming to our CCUSD schools. So again, I think Dr. Jensen has talked about that program could at some point move. You look at some of the factors. Again, SFD was a big factor. I know I've heard, well, SFD really shouldn't count. It shouldn't be a factor. I would argue even if you just take potential roof costs, 1.2 million. If we keep Lone Mountain open, that goes down to 800, and then 600 would be all of Desert Willow. That's 1.4 million total. That's $200,000 more than the 1.2. And even the potential, if I'm going to sit there and close schools and I have the potential to get funding for these projects, that to me is a better decision than not having that possibility. I think there is some misunderstanding, talking with Mike Santina a lot. Does the SFD have limitations? Absolutely it does. However, there's no doubt that it should play a significant role in closures decisions. We have historically relied heavily on that funding. While it may not have come in year one of a request, it has come down the line. Without that, we're putting ourselves at more risk. And an example, even when it doesn't get fully covered, Cactus Shadows, a chiller went down. They were the ones that came and brought this a 500-ton rental to like keep the building alive and students could still come in terms of until we figured out what needed to be done. So again, all our buildings are a little bit different. Black Mountain Horseshoe Trails have different HVAC systems than DSA, Desert Willow, and Lone Mountain, but SFD support is a critical piece in terms of maintaining our buildings and the upkeep.
I also found that question a little bit funny in respect to there was a question on what are we doing to attract, recruit, and retain students, and if that program is bringing students from outside, of course we're marketing that program, which, yes, that would be an important piece to recruit and retain those students from the outside. So that's kind of playing one side and then the other on that one.
Well, okay, so good point, one side or the other. Then I go back to the goal of closing these two schools is not to basically give up the asset. You are looking at potentially repurposing the assets. Okay, so just track with me for a second if I'm catching this right. I think you already know where I'm going because I see your wheels turning. So if you're sitting there and saying, hey, by reducing, we're reducing the wear and tear on the buildings. Okay? There's no way to reduce the wear and tear on a roof. A roof is a roof. Mm-hmm. So no matter what, if you're not relinquishing the asset, you still have the cost of the roof. So that's kind of maybe my frustration with the, and again, I'm trying not to like be a wise fill in the blank, but when we talk about SFD, it's one of those things of like, it's a home warranty. And home warranties are subjective to what you can and can't get done. So to me, the conversation was, I dismissed that right out of the gate because I'm like, you're still keeping the asset. So you still have cost. You might mitigate wear and tear from like kids running through the building and you got to repaint them. You might wear and tear because you're basically stabilizing the AC unit, but there's other fixed costs that you're not running away from. And they're the ones that you say are the biggest. So I'm confused why it's an argument. And it really kind of piggies back off that my next question, which really is, at the end of the day, if we take and look at, let's just for the sake of argument, we'll keep it on the two schools we're talking about. If you take off the SFD and you take off Spanish immersion, to the argument of that, but just look at the two schools holistically and say, take away the argument points and just say those two schools. Why are we talking about closing them? Now, I know the answer to one, but I'll let you guys say it just for the giggles. But why? How did you get to Lone Mountain?
I'd actually prefer for you to say it if I'm not
Well,
sure.
I mean, DSA's obviously been on the chopping block forever, so it's kind of, the unfortunate side is that school had the most opportunity to be something special, but you didn't control who managed that thing into the ditch. But you got these two schools. I'm still trying to understand how we arrived when you look at the holistic of our schools. How did we pick those two? Because the only stating point of why we arrived at the destination was SFD and geographical.
And enrollment and future projections, as Desert Willow's future projections by 27 are higher than Lone Mountain. So there was.
But that argument, okay, but
Turnover. I mean, there's multiple things I think we stated. I don't know if they're blocked out right now. But it's one of those things where there were multiple pieces that were talked about, and that's also again going with the phase two.
That's what we're here.
But going
again,
with the phase
constant.
2 piece that was also important to you too is if we do repurpose that school and we do move forward with a community ed program that is on that side where we are bringing in, again, we can charge for programming. That could also create a revenue stream to cover the cost of that roof. So if you're dealing with the phase 2 and the concern over phase 2, I think that would continue that conversation.
Okay. I think I lost everybody on that one.
Just a comment.
bad.
From my experience, when the district has submitted requests to SFB, well, SFB, D, whatever they want to be.
EFG, yeah.
D currently.
There have been very few things that have been declined. And as Ryan said, they haven't always been paid in the year requested, but there have been very, very few things. So to say that the SFB or D is going to completely turn their back, I don't think that's
I don't think that's the case,
realistic.
but again, most of the conversation, regardless of the points you just made, most of the conversation narrative has been heavy down on that play. And it's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the full puzzle. And to be honest,
I think, remember, more the heaviness of it is because we've relied so heavily on it throughout history because we've been taking $2 million that would otherwise be appropriated for those types of things and moving them in to cover our M&O expenses, so we haven't had the capital outlay to do that. So I think that's why it's been relied so heavy on, is because this district has so heavily relied on it.
So, and you can make that argument either way too, in respect to if you decided to close Desert Willow, we're still responsible for that building. So a roof's a roof at that point.
Correct. Well, that's what I'm trying to. If you remove some of the non-starters in the conversation, what's the real root, right? Like, just because you're shining a light here and saying, "Hey, look here," I always say, "Well, what am I missing over here?" So, what other variable short of what you've pointed out am I missing in the equation? And that's what I was trying to like.
If I understand what you were saying as far as the bullet points that went into the decision on the recommendations, geographically, where Desert Willow is, it's a more desirable location as far as being in a more affordable area to attract elementary age students versus where Lone Mountain is. The average home price in one area is a little different than the other. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah,
Okay.
100%.
Okay.
And that has, in talking with some of the real estate firms, that there is a higher potential for turnover within Desert Willow area for families.
There's no
Brianna,
more.
Brianna
Yeah.
doesn't have any more questions.
Just quickly, a higher potential for turnover, meaning families coming and going, or okay.
Well, more so the ability for, I mean, back in the day, neighborhoods turned over, and I'm not a realtor, so I apologize if this, but you kind of counted on neighborhood turnover as, for instance, I've been in my house since 1999. Typically, in years past, I would have moved on, and perhaps a younger family moved into that place, and that was where your elementary schools kept gaining students and not
Yep.
reducing.
But you have a gold mine now. If you bought it in 1999.
It's a different conversation.
Yes. it
Correct.
is.
Keep it on track, Busby.
Yes, I am.
Greer.
It's great.
I'm not gonna. No, it's not happening that quick. I've already told her I'm in denial.
Just call me Janet. It's all good.
Yeah, we're on first name basis. Let's
Yeah,
just
we
go.
are we're among friends here. At one point, there was, not today, but there was commentary that possibly opening our preschool to 2-year-olds. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's one of the
Okay.
things. And again, in an effort to bring people in, because again, I think when CCUSD gets their hooks in people, that they stay. And so if we can get 2-year-olds, then that potentially allows us to keep them, because ultimately we want them K through 12. So if we can get them earlier and they stay in Cave Creek, then yes, that's an opportunity.
Okay. Couple of questions
Sure.
about that. One, how would you market this? I mean, how are you going to get the word out that, hey, Cave Creek's got a 2-year-old preschool program now? Because word of mouth isn't exactly the most efficient.
No, for a lot of our people, and in particular more grandparents, I mean, print still works, so you've got print advertising there into those communities that can be spread. Allison's done a great job doing some more targeted social media posts, because you can geofence and you can age group and you can advertise specifically there.
So
I think
we're currently doing paid social.
mhm.
Okay.
In many districts, it starts with their employees, like, it's a.
Correct, and that was another big piece, even for our employees. Do we have it? Because we do offer it at a reduced rate, so we could help them at a younger age. And sorry, I lost my train of thought, but
Well, there could be some
the
real.
social media. Oh, and then we've been working exceedingly hard. So we've got a renewed interest in partnerships through Kiwanis, through the chamber, through all those things, and using their material and their emailers in terms of what goes out to the community as another resource to say, hey, by the way, CCUSD now has this. So there are opportunities that we have to market to a different group and a bigger group than I think we've been able to touch before, and it really is through those relationships that we've built over the past year with some of those community groups again.
Okay, so to have a 2-year-old program, is it just running, would it potentially be the school year? Would it be a year-round program?
Yeah, so those are some of the initial conversations that I'm having with Jim Grosso, who oversees ECS and our before and after care. So it's working with the licensing with the state, because you have to get it licensed, you have to staff it in a certain way. And so during the school year, do you run it as kind of a full daycare program where employees can drop them off at 6 a.m. and pick up, or not employees, the community can drop their kiddo off at 6 a.m., pick up at 6 p.m., or is it run during the school day if it stays on the site? So those are all the things to work out and look at, but also looking at what is our competition around us and how do we do it better, meet the needs of our families, things like that. So those are all things that Jim is currently exploring.
And we have had conversations with him. He has talked about the feasibility. He knows what licensing needs to take place, what needs to go on from the ECS end as well.
Okay. Another question?
So in looking forward, again, I'm focused on the vision. Have we gone through and done an aggressive projected expense plan for the existing facilities, less the two, assuming we choose to close those? Like, have we really gone through kind of with a fine-tooth comb so that we can look at this 2.5 million and getting things righted? Are we sure that we don't have, I mean, obviously, there's a crystal ball scenario, we all know that, but in terms of really looking at it, can we look ahead, and have we, to know what's coming?
So the aggressive expense plan, are you talking about from a facility
Yes.
standpoint? Do you want to talk about, I mean,
Yeah, so on our webpage, on the thing, there's a 10-year projection based on life cycles of items at each school, whether it be carpet, paint, units, things like that, that has that spelled out. And so it'll tell you kind of if you were to replace things or upgrade things on the cycle, what it would be, how much would it cost over the next 10 years. So that's on the website there. As far as like facilities upgrades, so if you are bringing in a program and you're going to need to reinvent some spaces, no, that's going to be dependent on what the program we bring in, or if it's an outside renter, is it something that cost is put onto them, that we allow for modifications of the buildings, but that part hasn't come.
right, or are we, again, talking with some properties, I did not know this, but apparently even unconditioned storage space is a big thing around, so they've even talked about, is that something that's a possible use, and what costs would be to the people that are coming in to rent it versus that. So yes, for some of that in terms of what expected, things that we anticipate coming, but in terms of what we would need to do for any major conversion like that, or again, the plan is to, one of the items that will come on the 11th is to put forth dams to the SFD for consideration for demolition. Again, there's no guarantee for that, but that is something that we want to get. We're working on the application, but then ultimately we need the board's resolution that's part of next Tuesday to do the final submission for that.
Yeah, and I mean, the cost, as far as the cost of covering some of those costs, which, Dan, you said on there.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, is that the $38 million Christmas list that's on the website?
I didn't add it up, but yeah. That's the Christmas list. If you were to repair
Yeah.
things on
Yeah, printers, that was the one that had like the printers line by line.
Yeah, they're the other ones too.
I went through that, yeah.
So, I mean, and looking at it, normally that would be, if it's not covered by SFD, it's capital. But as we saw, that capital is not going to be there if we keep our current
keep
spending.
moving the $2 million every year.
The question becomes, of that Christmas list, how do we find the funds to begin repairing it?
Got some thoughts.
So that is, right now we are using some of our rental revenue to make some repairs that aren't covered by SFD, or to replace, like we were just replacing the baseball field lights because athletics have, and softball field lights because the athletics have costs. So $9,000 for that, and so that has to be covered from some other revenue stream.
So I guess just to clarify that, our facilities guy, Mike, I can't think of his last name.
Santino.
Does he regularly, or part of that staff, do they regularly go through each facility and identify? That's what kind of, because I get the thing on the website, but that's like projected if this, right? Not necessarily this is what we know or really seriously perceive as coming up in the next year or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a minimum amount, by SFD standards, they have to do walkthroughs and do a minimum amount of preventive maintenance and meet minimum guideline standards in all of the buildings in order for SFD to go ahead and cover it as well. So there is that
So
Mr.
we know what's
Santina does. He has an idea.
To some extent,
Yeah.
all right. And is all that factored into all this budgeting ahead of time?
As far as facilities, repair
Yes.
costs, again,
We've been taking that DAA money and sliding it over into M&O.
so
Which makes us rely very heavily on the SFD and going through that process to get.
and then using, and the one thing that, as I, again, coming in and looking at our facility, so let's use like Sonoran Trails, for example. That gym is used pretty much every night. And right now, currently, and historically, what's been happening is any kind of those civic center funds or the rentals for those facilities goes into a big pot. which then maintenance can pull out of. But the difficulty with that is when we have things such as our high school basketball courts that needed to be reconditioned last year. It's just that general fund that we can put. It's like, again, those that get more wear and tear, like Sonora Trails Gym, we should have something earmarked in order to be able to take care of that facility. And right now, it's going in that general pool because that's the only pool we have to take care of other maintenance costs.
So I think right now we defer a lot of maintenance. For instance, at one of the gyms at the high school, neither the bleachers go back anymore or the motors are dead. And so, yes, we'd want to fix that. But right now, it's where is it on the priority list to be able to fix those as opposed to going, oh, there's water heater that's not covered that we have to do that instead. So.
And believe it or not, just to give you an example, Mike actually worked with SFD and got them to cover the replacement bleachers, which most people were very shocked that they would do that, but he's got a very good working relationship with them, and so that was actually covered, so we did not have to spend those dollars.
Sure. Trying to figure out which
We have 11 minutes.
I know, I'm trying to figure out which one to end on. Okay, I think that goes, I guess I'll end with this one then. Great point. So we've got, I call it the Christmas list. We've got the field, the high school field facility upgrade that needs to be done. There's a lot of numbers coming, right? I feel bad for you. Never stops, right? And again, I think this has been a kind of a long thing that the district's done, is that there are people in this community that will help. And you're hitting on some of them. But I do think that this district, for the longest time, does refuse a hand sometimes. There's a lot of mechanisms in this community, from, as you've heard from parents, marketers. There's all these resources. And as we hit these points and we talk about some of these fun things that we need and we don't have money for, I would just encourage you guys to speak about it and to ask for the help, because you do refuse it more than you take it. And I can say that because I'm one of those people. I had to get on the school board for you to tolerate me. You know what I mean?
I'd prefer you to be blunt, because I do think
And that's a stretch.
I've been told no a lot. And asked. So if I'm not asking the right people, that would be part of together in terms of being,
Yeah.
hey, you know what? This is the right person to go ask.
Yeah, and then I would just say the people that have gotten up and said we'll help, take their help. I mean, there's people that are really good with numbers. It helps Ryan in his chaos of numbers that he has to live in. Again, we talk about mechanisms and not putting the burden on teachers. There's people. I think we got to double down on taking the hand of the community and challenging the community of not just say you'll help me, show me you'll help me, right? And I think that's the piece that I would say as we continue to move forward, regardless of outcomes, is it's time to take it all. And it's time to, if we're going to be together, then let's be together.
Well, thank you for changing it to we from this district, so I appreciate it.
Well, we're all in this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sitting here because, this is just fun for me. I chose this because I believe in this district. I think we've got a lot, and I would tell you guys, believe in
Agreed.
what we have. And sometimes I feel like, yes, the noise is the noise, but when you bring everybody together and you're transparent and you show them something different and you give them a different result, you get a different outcome. I mean, I thought this was kind of cool. I found a district out in Michigan that posts all their financials down to every single bank transaction. I mean, that's wild when you think about transparency. Oh, it's dangerous, but wild, right?
They probably have a little different funding.
Hey, listen, I'm just saying, I challenge us to all think different. Because if you get the community to believe, then there isn't really anything we can't achieve. I mean, we are going out there, and yes, now's not the time, right, to go look at 1.6 for a field. Well, that's not your burden, but maybe we can go find some people that can help. So it's not on the burden of the district, so you can focus on that water heater. The bleachers aren't working. Ask, right? There's people that do want to do good things and bless the district and move on, and I just think sometimes we miss those opportunities and we say no so many times, those people fade to the dark. So please don't.
Thanks.
Just to piggyback on that, reaching out to people, yes, you may have to talk to 20 people before you find one that wants to help, but that will give that person more ownership in this district. And it grows exponentially. And so, I mean, look at me. I was a classroom volunteer at one point, and now I won't leave. I'm just kidding. Does anybody have any other questions that were not asked?
I think for now, I mean, I have millions of questions, but I think they're getting answered case by case. And again, like I said, thank you guys. I know I've been in your offices. I'm a grind. But again, just trying to make a sound decision for what's best for our district as a whole.
I know this was...
So are we.
Listen, I know that. If you weren't, you wouldn't let me in the house and you'd keep me at bay. So it says we're in this together, right?
I know this was a little bit of a challenge to get even us together, and everybody had to set aside some other responsibilities and duties to make time to be here. I appreciate everybody's time, and I appreciate the effort the administration's putting in to help us understand how you got to where you are right now. So thank you for that. And if there are no other questions, we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned, and it is 5:25.
Thank you, guys.
I have a question.
Yeah.